I mean, you expecting that, I assume, in this primary? And why are those numbers so high historically in New Hampshire?
New Hampshire are professional voters. That's what we do. We take our voting seriously. We take our elections seriously. We take our politics seriously. A lot of it stems from things such as a dynamic where we have 400 state reps. So for the most part, everybody knows a politician right out of the gate. So that definitely helps. To put this in perspective, 330,000 people voting in the Republican primary. There will be other people voting in the Democratic primary as well. But in the Republican primary, 330,000 people voting out of what the Secretary of State on their website lists is 873,000 voters.
Wow.
So 330,000 out of 873,000 is an enormous amount for a Republican primary. The largest number we had before was in 2016 when we had 285,000 people voting.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Hey, welcome to American Potential. Thanks for joining us. What an exciting time for America, picking its leaders. And for those people who follow politics, this is like the best time of the year. Normally, it depends on who the incumbent is. Sometimes the horse race is on the Democrat side. Sometimes it's on the Republican side. This time around, it's on the Republican side. The big focus was on the Iowa caucus, and now turning to the New Hampshire primary, the first primary in the nation, and then on to South Carolina and on to Super Tuesday. So it's just an exciting time. But as this all heats up and Americans are starting to decide who they think would be best to lead their country, some states get to cast their votes earlier than others. As the Iowa caucus wrapped up, all eyes now turn towards New Hampshire for the first in the nation primary. And we did an episode back in the fall to talk about what it was like in New Hampshire at that time. Now, Americans for Prosperity New Hampshire State Director Greg Moore, who's a good friend, talked on a previous episode that some Granite Staters were in the kind of kicking the tire phase to see which candidate they may vote for. He also made the comment that the joke around New Hampshire was the closer you get to the primary, you can't swing a dead cat without taking out 2 or 3 presidential candidates. So with the primary less than a few days away, what's it like in New Hampshire? I want to welcome Greg Moore back to the show to talk about what Granite Staters are seeing and hearing. Greg, thanks for being with us. Yeah, so, we were just talking. You've been doing this political stuff for 30 years now. It sounds like you've been around doing this. How many primaries have you been through? 8 New Hampshire primaries. And I just can't wait to get to some of the history of it. And, we talked about the last time and we'll start with that. I'm not going to give the answer. We're going to let our listeners think about it for a minute. But the last time one single presidential candidate, the same candidate, won the Iowa caucus and New Hampshire primary, it's been a while. So think about that for a minute, listeners and viewers. And we're going to get back to that with Greg in just a second. But listen, Greg, we're just a couple of days away from the first in the nation primary. What's your thought? How are Granite Staters feeling about this primary?
Well, as I mentioned, there's a tire kicking phase. The first is a get to know you phase, and there's a tire kicking phase, and then there's the people are starting to sort things out. Right now, we're entering into the final phase, which is the fatigue, where all the mail, all the TV, all the digital ads, all the phone calls, all the door knocks are starting to get people to a point where they're ready for this to happen. And the thing is about New Hampshire, I think that people don't realize what separates New Hampshire from every other primary in the country. And I know that a lot of people say, well, in my state, things are different. And quite often they're wrong. Politics tends to be pretty consistent in most places. But the thing that separates the New Hampshire primary is the breadth of the participation. Just to put it in perspective, for those states that separate their state primary from their presidential primary, most of those states will see about 50% more people will vote in a presidential primary than in a state primary. In New Hampshire, we see that number close to 130 to 140% greater participation. So everybody comes out. And what that means is it's not just the political junkies. It's not just the people who live and breathe politics. It's just average people who just don't follow politics necessarily as closely as other people. They probably aren't watching political debates. They're probably not necessarily watching Fox News or any other news channel constantly. They're just going out living their lives, but they do want to vote and they do want to participate. And when you start bringing those folks in, you have to really meet them where they are. And that's where having a critical grassroots infrastructure is so important in a state like New Hampshire, so you can actually get to those people, have those conversations. And it's for that reason, because you've pulled people in who are less and less and less engaged politically. It's the reason why New Hampshire tends to break late. And the candidate with momentum is often the candidate that does well in New Hampshire, just because the people who aren't necessarily all that engaged are paying attention a whole lot right at the very end. They're trying to figure it out. And right now is a really critical time. But I got to tell you what, the week between Iowa and New Hampshire, I like to tell people it is a Super Bowl of American politics. It really is. The weight of the political world for 1 week lands in a state of 1.4 million people. We often suggest that there might be as many media in New Hampshire as there are residents, and you cannot walk up and down Elm Street, which is the main street in Manchester, the largest city, without bumping into 2 or 3 film crews trying to interview you. If you have a couple witty lines, you could probably be on television in numerous countries across the world, and they all come here for the New Hampshire primary. The media love this state. The media love coming here. They don't love Iowa when it's apparently minus 20 degrees outside, but New Hampshire, they to a person you talk to the media, they love covering it. They love the New Hampshire citizens, just how curious they are, just how much they know, and I think it really speaks well for the state that we embrace our role so much and have so many people participate. I know that the Democratic Party, the DNC, is trying to rip New Hampshire off the calendar, but they're missing the fact. They're missing the fact that we are very, very good at identifying good candidates who can go on to become great candidates in a general election.
So you talk about, all the media attention that goes on with this, and it's certainly true. This cycle, I want to compare this cycle a little bit to previous cycles because you're so early in the process, right? A lot of states, by the time they have a primary, the race is either pretty close to over, or there's like 1 or 2 candidates, a 1 or 2 person candidate race, things like that. In New Hampshire, normally that's not the case, right? Sometimes you've got 7 or 8, Republican candidates or 7 or 8 Democrat candidates that are still viable and trying to get that nomination. States later in the process are usually down to 1 or 2. This year, it seems, though, that it is down to a couple of viable candidates for the Republican nomination. I mean, has it been is there a different feel to it this time around than there was before?
Yeah, yes. Traditionally, Jeff, the role of Iowa is to whittle a field down to 3. And then the role of New Hampshire becomes to whittle a field down to the final 2 contenders. That's right. Historically how it's worked out. But you're right. Former President Trump and Ambassador Haley are certainly on the rise. They are head and shoulders ahead of the other candidates in terms of like their polling numbers and the amount of attention they're getting, the attendees at their events, things like that. And you can feel that on the ground. That's one thing about New Hampshire. You really can feel that momentum on the ground. And we haven't really had something where it has been a choice between 2 candidates in a major primary, probably since I would say the Democratic primary in 2008, where Obama and Clinton really sort of separated themselves pretty early on, and I think that those 2 fundamentally had a 2-person race in New Hampshire. But it's uncommon, highly uncommon to see that. Usually, you're right. We usually have a few more people poking around.
Yeah, and I mean, do you see that on the ground? Do you feel like it seems like former President Trump and Ambassador Haley kind of they have the mojo behind them, their camps, and the others are kind of also Rands, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, when you attend the events, and look, we all know that the former President Trump has massive events, and it's kind of like the Grateful Dead is coming through town.
Right.
Now, it's also important to understand, and I know the media like to point this out, is the fact that when former President Trump has an event, a lot of those people are not from New Hampshire. So you'll have people coming from as far away as New York, New Jersey, even Pennsylvania, which is amazing that people would make that kind of travel.
Right.
So he certainly has huge events, but Ambassador Haley has been having absolutely packed events of late as well. Places where she'll go to the same venue that some of the other candidates have gone and get some multiple of the number of people attending. There was one event that was being held at an event in Concord, New Hampshire, which is our capital, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis had probably about 50 people there, and then Ambassador Haley showed up at the same venue and had 500. So you can feel that on the ground, and you can see which way these races are breaking. So it really does give you a chance to. And the thing about New Hampshire is it's so geographically small that you can get to all the parts of the state to go see all the candidates in one day if you wanted to.
Right. And your sense right now is that those are the two candidates breaking for both former President Trump and Nikki Haley, and those are the top candidates in New Hampshire. That's generally your sense. Yep. Right.
That's my feeling.
Okay, how about you talked about you're in the fatigue stage, which I think most voters can understand, right? And they get there at some point. I'm sure it's extra fatigue when it comes to New Hampshire. But like you talked about, everybody's tired of getting the mail and the TV. Explain to folks what that means. How many mail pieces do you get? Like, you're so involved, I'm sure you're on every list that's possible. Are you being targeted both by candidates and outside super PACs and everybody else as well? And how many mail pieces do you get? How many commercials do you see a day?
So as far as the mail, a light day would be 3 pieces of mail. The high water mark so far, which was last Thursday, I think maybe, was 7 pieces of mail in the mailbox.
Wow. A day.
And so that's every day. The print shops in New Hampshire are thriving. So that's a good sign. It's helping the local economy. And
this is a way to fix the failed Biden economy, is to do this and have everybody to print goes to work for print shops, right?
Yeah. But unfortunately, sometimes printing glossy mailers and printing dollars can have some of the same bad consequences. But but nonetheless, if you are in New Hampshire and you just open up your YouTube. You can't avoid the YouTube pre-roll ads. You can't avoid if you put on the television and you turn on the news, and the commercial breaks are exclusively presidential stuff. I mean, I feel bad for anyone who's trying to sell a car or a restaurant that wants to tell people to come and visit, because the prices are just astronomical. I think they'll all just wait until after next Tuesday and wait for the price to come back down to something more reasonable.
Right.
But it is intense, and it's like a wall that hits you. Yeah.
It's got to be an amazing feeling. And again, I think most people don't understand that, who live in other states across the country. So let's answer the question for folks. So when is the last time that the same person in the Republican presidential candidate won both Iowa and New Hampshire?
Yeah, the last time when I will say there's been a competitive Republican primary. I say competitive. I mean, I suppose you could look at 1992 with Pat Buchanan's run against then incumbent George H.W. Bush. But I say competitive Republican primary. The last time was actually 1976 when Gerald Ford won both Iowa and New Hampshire against Ronald Reagan.
Wow, that's really amazing. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. And why do you think that is? Well, let's talk a little bit about the difference between, voters in Iowa or voters in New Hampshire, right? Because you've got a primary, and caucus goers in Iowa. I mean, is that difference between caucus goers in Iowa and voters in New Hampshire? Is it distinct enough that that's why we don't have this happen very often?
Well, Jeff, as I pointed out when we were on your show earlier this year with Drew Klein from Iowa and Candace Carroll from South Carolina, right. Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents. But there's a rationale behind that. And for your listeners, I would say just try to visualize this. Iowa is a state of 3.2 million people, and they're expected they get about 150,000 people participate in caucuses. And New Hampshire is a state of 1.4, so less than half the size of Iowa. And we're anticipating that there will be 330,000 people voting in the New Hampshire primary. So less than half the size, but more than twice as many voters. And what that does is it brings in a whole bunch of people into the process. But what it really does is it shows people who it gives a much better reflection of who could win a general election, because our primaries in New Hampshire are open, meaning the people who are independents, they can go and they can take a Republican ballot and vote in that day. And then now technically while they're voting, they are a registered Republican, but then on the way out the door, they can re-register back as independent again. And so you in order to be effective in Hampshire, you have to have a fairly broad appeal. You need to be able to create a message that's appealing and that speaks to more than just a niche group and not just the hardcore activists, because that's a lot of the people who are participating in Iowa. So I think that's a really positive thing, and it's a positive sign for someone's ability over the long term to put together a good campaign for what is. New Hampshire is a purple state. We're our state that is in play in the general election. So your ability to create something that's durable and having a message that appeals broadly, I think, is something that often is very different than what we might see in Iowa.
Right. Now, New Hampshire has a high voter turnout too, right? Like the percentage of voters obviously is pretty high. The turnout. I mean, you expecting that, I assume, in this primary? And why are those numbers so high historically in New Hampshire?
New Hampshire are professional voters. That's what we do. We take our voting seriously. We take our elections seriously. We take our politics seriously. A lot of it stems from things such as a dynamic where we have 400 state reps. So for the most part, everybody knows a politician right out of the gate. So that definitely helps. But we do take voting seriously. And to put this in perspective, 330,000 people voting in the Republican primary. There will be other people voting in the Democratic primary as well. But in the Republican primary, 330,000 people voting out of what the Secretary of State on their website lists is 873,000 voters.
Wow.
So 330,000 out of 873,000 is an enormous amount for a Republican primary. So I tell people this all the time. I know that we've worked as an organization to try to get more people and bring them in, but our results have been harder here because people are already pretty engaged and already want to participate in these polls. But that 330,000 number would still be a significant increase over a record-breaking number. The largest number we had before was in 2016 when we had 285,000 people voting. Wow. But keep in mind that it was a competitive primary on either side. So those true swing voters some broke Democrat and some broke Republican. Without a competitive Democratic primary, in fact, Joe Biden's not even on the ballot in New Hampshire. Without that competitive primary over there, we expect some more of those swing voters to pull into the Republican primary as well.
Yeah. How about endorsements? Do endorsements matter in New Hampshire? I know Iowa, a lot of coalitions and endorsements from faith leaders and the governor and things like that do matter. But is that the case in New Hampshire?
Well, it depends on what is coming along with the endorsement.
Right.
So, for example, here in New Hampshire, Governor Sununu has endorsed Nikki Haley. Okay. But he didn't just put out a press release. He's out campaigning with her every day. He's out acting as a surrogate on her behalf, doing national media coverage. He's out there working every day. And Governor Sununu is very popular here in New Hampshire. And so his endorsement, plus the work he's putting in behind it, make a huge difference. Obviously, the other major endorsement that Nikki Haley received was the endorsement of Americans for Prosperity Action, our sister organization. And that definitely helped her quite a bit as well, because her campaign was late in pulling together a staff here in New Hampshire, and having a grassroots organization that's on the ground and ready to go made a huge difference, is making a huge difference for her too.
Yeah. So it sounds like those two things are kind of maybe Nikki Haley's advantage in New Hampshire. I assume Trump has some advantages. He's the former president of the United States. He has a record that he can run on and point to as well. I mean, what are his advantages as he goes into this New Hampshire primary?
Well, he's run twice in New Hampshire before, right? So he's built a list of supporters. He's built a list of everything
Remind me real quick what happened in 2016 with in that race in New Hampshire.
Right. So coming out of 2016, as some may recall, Senator Ted Cruz had won Iowa.
Right.
And so people were questioning whether Trump's actually had the momentum, or if Cruz was going to put something together and just start rolling. And then here in New Hampshire, Donald Trump just really did a great job. It didn't hurt that his campaign manager is a New Hampshire resident and was a former New Hampshire state director for AFP, and Corey Lewandowski.
Right.
So that was one big advantage he had. But yeah, no, now, and he got 35% here to John Kasich's 17.
John Kasich came in second place in New Hampshire.
Yes.
Where was I? I can't remember.
But to be fair, Kasich had an all-in strategy for New Hampshire.
Sure.
So he was all in, and he got the endorsement of John E. Sununu, the former congressman and senator, who was really working hard for him. The Sununu name goes a long way in New Hampshire, and so that definitely helped Kasich in that run. And then you had Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, each getting like 10 or 12 points. So it was just a case where there were, to your earlier point, there were a lot of people in the race, and they were all slicing and dicing each other up in terms of trying to win this state. But to your earlier question, I think that the former President Trump has all those lists of supporters. He has that infrastructure that is already in place that makes life so much easier when you're trying to run for a second time, because you're not starting from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Right. So advantages both ways, but you kind of see this as a two-person race at this point, particularly in New Hampshire as it goes. Now that the Iowa caucus is over, do Granite Staters, do they have a greater chance of run into a presidential candidate or somebody from the national media? Which one do they have a better chance of running into?
You can't avoid the national media.
Right.
It's funny. I sit down with my comms person, and we go through all the interview requests that I'm getting right now, and you just have to. It's basically just triage.
Right.
We physically cannot do all the interviews that we're getting requested of us, particularly the international media. And we're just saying, look, that's where we draw the line. Much as I love the people of Japan,
right.
I can't spend all of my day talking to them. There's still some things we have to do to try to stay engaged here for the last few days.
But you still have plenty of time to join us here on American Potential, and we appreciate that, my friend. I do. How many people from the national media today have you run into? What time is it today or right now? It's what? It's
just before 2:00. Just
almost 2:00. How many national media have you run into today?
Well, I started the day off with an interview with CBS News.
Okay.
I had a conversation with a fellow from the Messenger, talked to somebody from the Washington Post, have interview requests lined up for USA Today, as well as National Public Radio.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, there's a whole host of other interview requests that I'm just getting, and I'm just like, if I can get to them, I will. If I can't, I can't.
So the big bet, the over under. What I mean, do you think you'll talk to more national media today, or get more mail pieces today?
The national media is definitely going to win this battle.
That's pretty incredible. Has there been anything in this presidential primary season that, I mean, you've been through so many of these. Has there been anything in this presidential primary season that sort of surprised you?
I think first of all, having gone through a bunch of these, nothing surprises me. But I think the thing that caught my attention was just the inability for Governor DeSantis's campaign to really get a lot of traction. I would have thought that his style and messaging would have played a lot better in New Hampshire. And he started out on a high, but it's just his numbers have been declining all throughout the entire year. So it's I would have thought that he would have been a more natural pick to do better than he's doing.
Yeah. So that surprised you, and maybe that surprised everybody across the country, was just sort of Governor DeSantis, out the gate seemed like the person to challenge Donald Trump, right, for this nomination. And it became apparent at some point, somewhere through the process, that Nikki Haley was, the candidate that had a better chance at challenging Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think that a big tactical error was just not showing up. Nikki Haley has spent more time in New Hampshire than any other candidate. And New Hampshire citizens reward those people who give us that type of attention. And alternately, we punish candidates who don't give us that type of attention. And Governor DeSantis really put an emphasis on visiting all 99 counties in Iowa, which, listen, it works for Chuck Grassley. So, so for example, there was a 2-month period where he did not come to the state of New Hampshire. And you can't really do that to New Hampshire. New Hampshire, I tell people all the time, it's like the spurned girlfriend, right? It's we demand that level of attention, and I think that the people who give it to us are rewarded.
Yeah. So tell me, what do people in the state usually do the day after the primary's over?
Well, most people just go to work
and say, "Get out of here! I can finally find a parking space."
Yeah, I mean, particularly in Manchester, which is like the epicenter of a lot of the activity.
Sure.
People are just, they're glad that the circus has left town for 4 more years. But we do like having the circus. We just, right when it gets to the very end, people start to get a little bit, okay, I'm ready for this to be put in the box in the shelf for 4 years.
Sure. Yeah. Do other people, so is this just the presidential primary? There's no other primaries going on? Or
yes, no, the only thing that's on the ballot, say for 2 parts of the state way up north, which are having special elections to fill some vacancies and some seats. Other than that, the only thing on the ballot is the presidency.
Yeah. So when do you have your regular primary?
Our regular primary is in September. So
very late.
Very late. So first primary in the presidential, one of the last ones in at the state level. Yeah. So, but there have been some efforts to move that primary up. But yeah, so it's not like there's anything else that's driving interest or turnout. It's just people being interested in who our next president could be.
Right. Tell folks too, what I find interesting in New Hampshire is how many state legislators you have. This is fascinating. And if people don't know, this is going to fascinate them because, most state legislatures, like I live in the state of Colorado, we have 100 total, right? Between the House and the Senate, we have 100 state legislators. Tell folks how many members of the legislature there are in New Hampshire.
So in New Hampshire, we have 400 members of our House of Representatives and 24 members of the state Senate. The 400 member House is the second largest legislative body in the country, only behind the U.S. House of Representatives. And unlike the U.S. House of Representatives, we only pay them $100 a year. So people say, how come you guys don't have term limits in New Hampshire? To which we say, we pay them $100 a year. They're going to leave after a term or 2 anyway. And by and large, they do. After, 1 or 2 terms, that's it, I'm done. Because people treat it like it's a volunteer activity. And what's really incredible is, number one, the amount of diversity you have in the House of Representatives, I don't care what bill you have. Somebody in the House is a subject matter expert on it because they work in that space and they just happen to understand that issue better than anyone else. And so that's one of the beauties of having a body that big. And you look at a lot of states and even neighbors of ours, and it's largely lawyers. It's just a bunch of lawyers who are getting together. Whereas in New Hampshire, there are very few lawyers. In fact, one of the challenges we had in the Judiciary Committee in the House a few years ago was that we didn't have enough lawyers to stock the Judiciary Committee. I mean, members.
That's usually not a bad problem to have.
Members who were lawyers. Yes. Well, because you are in the process of actually writing law, so it does help to have somebody who understands, has a deep understanding of how the law works. Right. But fundamentally, you look at the House, and it's incredibly representative. Everybody, for the most part, in New Hampshire knows a state rep. And if anybody has a problem, they can go to their state rep and say, can you help me out here? Whereas if you're a state the size of Colorado and you have 100 legislators, probably most people don't know a state legislator. They just don't know a state legislator. So if they had a problem, where would they go to try to get help? And I can tell you that New Hampshire legislators are incredibly conscientious folks. They really are people who go above and beyond for what they get. They look at it more as a volunteer service than they do a job, and I think that as a state we've done incredibly well by having that process and not having a professional class of legislators.
Right. Well, $100 a year that's something there. I mean, that's I wonder what the next closest legislature is that has that low of pay for their legislature. Do you know?
I don't, but I will tell people that people wonder, why is that? Well, it's actually in our Constitution. There was actually a scandal in the early 19th century with railroad industries basically bribing legislators.
Okay, and
they put the provision in setting the salary at $100 a year, and also saying you can't take any outside income for your work. Well, inflation, and as we all know, thanks to Bidenomics, we got a lot more of that. But inflation has taken a toll, and $100 in 2024 ain't what it was in the 1820s.
No, it's not. Thanks to Joe Biden.
Absolutely,
he can't be blamed for all of that, but he can be blamed for the last 3.5 years for sure. Yeah, that's amazing. What do you plan on doing the day after the primary, my friend?
Checking to see the legislative calendar to see if I have to go testify on a bill up in Concord. I'm not joking about that. The legislative session has already started, and time and tide waits for no man, as they say. So if the train's going, you better get on it.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, great, Greg. Thanks for taking the time out. I mean, I know you're very busy. You talked about all the national media that's reaching out to you, and I just appreciate your friendship and you willing to come on and talk to us about it. And a few more days to survive of this primary, and then it's kind of back to life as normal, hopefully, for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, we love it. As a political junkie, I think it's great. I think it's great that all the people who are coming into our state to come in and enjoy it with us and to participate in the process. But yeah, no, once it's done, I'll be okay with not having it around anymore.
I'm sure that's the case. All right, Greg, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jeff.
You bet. All right. Listen, thanks for joining us. And what a great opportunity to talk with Greg and the incredible history of the New Hampshire primary all playing out next week, right before our very eyes. And I hope that was a great look at the history of it and kind of a look at what someone from New Hampshire gets to go through when they go through these primaries and see all the people can't find a parking spot, all those things. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.